Hello, everyone. I'm very excited today because finally I will have a nice conversation with my friend Steve Peters. Steve and I met several years ago in the States in the place from Martin Black. I think it was 2018. And yeah, if you don't know Steven so far, now is the time to get to know him. So, Steven, maybe you want to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and why it is important that I have this conversation with you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Steve Peters. I'm a neuroscientist. For over 30 years, my specialty was assessing brain functioning. So I'd look at lots of MRIs and neuroimaging with humans. But I've always had horses. And so I began dissecting out a lot of horse brains, reading their neurochemistry, um, reading the peer-reviewed scientific journals in the veterinary field. And that's the lens through which I saw horses. And in medicine, you have something called evidence-based. Now everything's evidence-based, but not then. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted to do. You had to have support, research, scientific evidence of what you did. So I was curious as to why that didn't exist in the horse world. So there were a lot of antiquated practices. I would ask people why they did something, and um, the explanations were not really satisfying to me. You could do training and techniques, but as far as brains are concerned, horse brains and your brain, they're individual. They're created by your experiences. They're created by your genetics. They're created by a lot of different factors. So one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And oftentimes, if you're not looking to understand the nervous system, the horse's nervous system, the horse's brain, you simply make them do things. And you can do that.
Yeah.
The problem being is that it also creates a lot of emotional and psychological baggage that goes along with that, that then you have to go back and try to fix, or it just haunts you and keeps popping up supposedly out of nowhere. So an understanding of the horse's brain functioning and also neurochemistry. Let me explain that little piece. Back when we,
That
Martin and I
little piece.
Back when Martin and I first wrote the book, there weren't a lot of people that were talking about cortisol with stress and glucocorticoids. And there weren't a lot of people. In fact, Martin and I laughed. When we were writing the book, he said, could you imagine one day horse people talking about dopamine or serotonin? Now you hear this all the time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, oftentimes where you hear it is somebody's learned a word or two, and they're very, very confident in the word or two that they've learned, let's say dopamine and serotonin. And so now they have a science-based horse training program.
Hmm.
You may want to use critical thinking to look at that. You can't get a degree in neuroscience from books on tape or,
Hmm.
just there's something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. You can look it up where in the beginning, where people are first getting some knowledge, they're the most confident of all. They think they know everything, right? And then as they learn more information and they say, oh gosh, look at all I don't know, then they get depressed because the curve goes rapidly down and they realize, I only knew this much and I was yapping away and
Yeah.
there's this much out there. And then science humbles you because slowly over time, you're constantly asking, is this true? Could this be right? How can I test this? What's the research? What's the evidence? And slowly you develop the confidence over a long period of looking at lots and lots of horses, looking at lots and lots of research to climb back up there. And unfortunately, what seemed to happen in the horse world, because a lot of trainers need to differentiate themselves from other trainers. So how
Mhm.
can I be different than this other trainer? Because there's a million out here. Well, I'm science-based because that's what I hear everyone talking about. Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to take away anybody's opportunity to earn a living, but I will tell you that's not in the horse's best interest, and it's not in the owner's best interest to get inaccurate information. In fact, at times that can be dangerous and harmful. So,
Absolutely, I agree.
um, with my science background and my small herd of 7 horses running around in their pastures, I really wanted to have larger numbers. So about 20 years ago, I hooked up with this cowboy, Martin Black. He's a fifth generation cowboy. He's worked with thousands and thousands of horses. And so I went out and spent time with him. In fact, that's where I met Nancy. We took our horses and climbed a pyramid of sand. I don't know if
That's
you
true.
remember.
That was very nice. Yes.
Yeah.
The
So what
moving sand.
Martin gives me is empirical evidence. Empirical evidence is part of the scientific process. These are observations. You could not get that many observations in a science experiment, hundreds of thousands of observations. So we put the, I spent time out there riding with him, out with horses, moving cattle, etc. And we sat down and a woman, Kim Stone, took lots of pictures. And so at night, we would go through all the pictures and say,
Mm,
you see the horse's facial nerve is tightening here. And he'd
mhm.
go, oh, yeah, I know that guitar string thing. Right. I
Yeah,
said, yes, what it looks like. So we found the puzzle pieces, his and mine, although the language was different, were a perfect fit.
yeah.
So we came up with the book. And now, almost 15 years later, all of our experience, all the new research, everything that we found, everything we didn't put in the first book, plus all the scientific literature to support everything we say, we threw in this book. It's not going to be a book like this. It's going to be out this fall. It's going to be a book like this.
That's
And with
awesome.
Kim's pictures in it. So you could say, I'm not a scientist. Why would I want to know about, I just want to train my horses. Well, how do you think you train them? You talk to their brain.
Absolutely. I agree.
And with that, I think we got to a point to where Nancy was telling me beforehand she had a few questions and we may be touching on those. So I'll make sure we stay on track.
Yeah, we have to make sure because I think we could talk for days. So everyone who knows me and my work a little bit knows that I'm like the going down the rabbit hole type of person. And for me, it's I didn't come from a scientific background, but I started recognizing with the horses which came in, which very often people came to me with horses who either had physical issues or behavioral issues, so to say, so problem horses. And very early, I figured out that these horses were not problem horses, that most of the time there was a miscommunication between human and horse, which is like we have a human brain, they have a horse brain. And we expect very often from horses to think like people do. And I mean, it's as well, I must excuse humans as well because we have a human brain. We can't think with a different one. We only have that one. So what I figured out over the years is I'm doing my job since 25 years now, and I see different horses than Martin and you as well, because the horses in Europe, the living space is very different. The environment in which horses live is different. So it's a very domesticated, a lot of cities and so on. So it's like the horse life here is even further away from nature. So there is a lot of issues, stress issues, which are nervous system issues. And I started to recognize patterns. And that's why I wanted to dive deeper into understanding the patterns I could recognize because I could figure them out. But I was thinking, it's like there's a missing link between all of it. And that's like, how do horses really learn? In which state do you have to be to learn? How do people learn? Because you have a human and a horse, and a horse is quite a big animal. You know, if you have warm bloods next to me, sometimes you have them like 1 meter 75 at the withers. That's a freaking amount of living kilos. And if it's not doing what I expect, my nervous system reacts like immediately. So the translation, horse brain, human brain, which we need, is really something which I see more and more that there is still like a lot of misunderstanding out there. I mean, there is awareness that we need to know more about it, which I find very good. And I mean, I contacted Martin because of your book and was glad to meet you these years ago. And so concerning the topic of stress, I think that's a good point to go from here because as long as we don't have problems and everything is nice, we're all good. But the moment problems occur with our horses or in the life with them, um, we start to be stressed. So could you maybe just from your point of view, because I have my ideas as well, but talk a little bit like about the learning capacity of horses when they are under stress, and as well, like how, I mean, how subtle stress can be expressed, and yeah, what happens with a horse, and the how much is a horse capable under stress to still focus on something, to still be learning, and if the horse is too relaxed, can it learn or not? So I would like you to get that out from your side.
That's quite a question. That's a good question.
It's like for the next hour.
That's a good question. Okay. What I'm going to say to you is true of you and true of your horse as well. That if so here's a window, right? And if we're within the window, that's what we call homeostasis,
Mhm.
right? So that's just normal functioning. Let's say I have my horse learn something, and they may or may not be paying total attention, right? You have to have attention for learning. You have to have for humans and horse attention and motivation, and you have to feel safe. Okay.
Mhm.
So here's this window. If we do something and the horse gets it right and we reward them, they get dopamine. And they do something right and they get dopamine. If we never leave our window of what they'll tolerate, we don't want to leave the arena. There's too much going on out there. We don't want to ride in the woods. Something could jump out and get us. There are too many bugs out there. I can't ride with other horses because so pretty soon we close the window of tolerance
Absolutely.
because we don't want any challenges whatsoever. And we stay in here trying to teach our horse, but every time we drill that horse, we do it again and again and again. The horse already knows how to do it. So they get less and less and less dopamine. So after a while, it's not pleasant anymore. After a while, they don't even want to do it anymore. Right. So they sort of check out on us. They can become very robotic. And you may say, well, that's good. I want them to be almost like a robot. Well, then you could buy a horse that you put a quarter in the slot and you get on and you ride it or go ride the merry-go-round, but they're living creatures. And if you took this horse who's here and now you go out for a trail ride, everything comes apart. And you say, oh, you stupid horse, how do
Mhm.
we get around this? Well, if you stay here, right, you need a certain level of arousal. If you sat in a classroom in the back and you were tired and you put your head down on the desk and the instructor went on and on and on, you're not learning anything. Nothing's getting in.
You zoom out.
If I say there's going to be a test, oh, now you perk up, right? And what I say today is going to be on that test. Uh, so if you want to pass the test, you really need to focus. You get your notebook out. Now you're listening. What's happened to you neurochemically? You got a chemical called norepinephrine that allowed you to be sympathetically aroused. So you came outside your level of comfort, but you're right at the top. You're right at the top of your level of comfort. You're challenged. You get another chemical, acetylcholine, in you and your horse. This lets you pay attention, like laser focused. It can't last forever, but you can stay right there This is the optimal learning situation for
Mm.
you and your horse. What if I say, I'm going over something very complicated today. It's going to be on the test. You're probably going to have to do some extra reading. And if you don't get a passing grade on this test, you fail for the year. You may get so anxious that even if you know the information, it doesn't come to you. You're
Mm.
just panicky. Your mind goes blank. Your hands get sweaty,
Mhm.
right? What I've done is I've taken you out of your window of tolerance too far,
Mhm.
right? Here's where people make a mistake. They think their horse shouldn't be that aroused. How far is too far out? You don't know. Sometimes you have to take your horse a little too far out
Yeah.
to see where it is. And that's information. Okay, we need to back up,
And
right?
it's
For example,
individual for each horse, right? Because
it's individual
the
because they
stress
have different
threshold
experience.
is, yeah, it's so it's like
Every
you said
horse,
in the beginning, it depends on how your brain was wired in your whole life through all experience you have had, because that's what your operation system is capable of doing. And there are some horses, if you add like this one or two stimuli which are new, they're already all over the place because you pass their capacity of, you know,
right?
handling it.
When they're up here, they can't learn. No learning
Exactly.
is taking place up here.
And then you
People
have
still
other horses.
try.
It's a regulation question, right? How much they are used to regulate
Right.
this
So
one.
people still try, but the horse is thinking, I got to
Exactly.
get out of here. This is terrible. So starting to move towards fight or flight, and people are still forcing the horse. And then they say, this stupid horse can't learn.
Yeah.
Well, not when they're there. But if you become artful enough to know where that window of tolerance is and challenging, you get
Hmm.
dopamine, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine all in the right mix. You make the right cocktail. It's going to be a little different for every horse. But
Hmm.
every time you come up there and train there, when you come back down, the horse's brain says, we lived. Nothing terrible happened. We made it.
Yeah.
The next time, the window opens. The
Exactly.
window opens. The window opens. And pretty soon you could take your horse into brand new situations and everything's fine. Why? Because they've learned to regulate their nervous system. You've
Exactly.
helped them to get there and come back. So you think keeping them in their comfort zone is the best option, but now they go anywhere, and if it's new, they potentially come apart on you, and then you call
Mm.
them a bad horse.
Yeah.
I really like what you said, Nancy, earlier about oftentimes what causes horses to get way up here is confusion, and they get confused because we're not clear.
Hmm.
There's something called signal to noise ratio. So you'd love your signal to be just very slight, subtle, and your horse
Hmm.
responding. But if all the noise, oh, there's people over there and there's something over there and the wind's blowing, all this is so noisy they can't even hear the signal. So then you think your
Yeah.
signal needs to be large. Listen, I'm telling you, right?
Mm.
Where the idea is let's manage the noise, get
Hmm.
you used to the noise so it doesn't bother you anymore. So let's work on the nervous system. Now the noise dampens. Now I can ask you in a whisper and you
Yeah.
can hear me.
And it's as
But
well
if,
a question of creating the environment. So depending on the horse and the situation, you need to choose the environment where sometimes, for example, I have people when they say like, "Oh, I went out hacking and then this horrible thing happened." And I'm like, "Okay, yeah, how does your horse react in a similar circumstance when they're at home in the arena?" And they're like, yeah, it's as well difficult. And I'm like, well, if it's already difficult at home where you do not have stimuli
right.
which come suddenly and could be like surprising, I wouldn't go out maybe yet. That's one thing. And then I see it often as well that horses, because I mean, every aid we apply, all our signs, if it's via lead rope or if it's via rein or stick or flag or whatever it is, it's human signs. For me, it's a human sign. So we put human vocabulary on a horse. So sometimes the horse as well just doesn't know that's the thing it has to react to. So you could have, because you mentioned when they go so far out of that
Mhm.
zone, for me, that's like kind of the stress threshold they are ready to hold. And if once you're over it, forget about it. There is a stress, there is a survival, because stress is a survival mechanism, right? And so it's a good thing. Like evolutionary wise, it's a very good thing because if your survival is, if your brain says my survival is in danger, I must do something. So we all know flight and fight. So flight is very obvious. As long as we have a lead rope, we can keep the horse, and as long as we don't fall off, maybe it stops. But I see, for example, that there's a lot of misunderstanding in the fight response because that's very often seen as bad behavior. Oh, they're just nasty or whatever. And you're like, no, maybe they just, for example, if you teach a young horse a whip and they don't know yet what it is and you don't introduce it well, you're not having like building a language of connecting like visual signs with tactile cues and so on. They don't know. So what will they say? If they get surprised, they might kick. Yeah, but that's not a bad response. It's for the horse, it makes sense to respond in that way.
Restraint is one of the most stressful things you can do to a horse. Restraint and isolation,
Yeah,
but restraint. That's why sometimes when the horse maybe spooks on a walk in the woods, and all of a sudden you clamp your legs on like a clothespin and you pull on the horses.
yeah,
Now they're in flight mode, but you're taking away flight.
yeah.
Almost the horse almost always will go to
Always
flight.
chooses flight. Yeah, I agree.
But if you start to take away flight, you only leave them with one. Well, you leave them with two
With two
options.
options. Yeah,
Eventually, they could freeze, or you go to fight.
yeah,
And is that horse's fault? No, they are now a victim of
exactly.
their neurochemistry. They're a victim, not a bad horse. What we've done is we've actually opened that avenue for them.
Yeah,
That's their only escape. They don't have a choice.
exactly. We
So
put them in the situation that they cannot react differently. Right.
understanding and working with the horse's brain is where we can get underneath all these things. Punishment really has no place.
Yeah.
The research will show you, learning theories will all show you, punishment has no place. So if we're calling hyperarousal bad behavior and we have a bunch of names to
Hmm.
call our horse, the reason you don't want to use that language, you will start to justify punishment.
Absolutely. I agree.
If you call them bad names, then they need to be disciplined. They need to
Yes,
show more respect. Most of the time, the horse is confused. The horse doesn't understand what you're saying. The horse is
absolutely.
too aroused to be with you. Let's work an example. We talked about trailer loading. You were telling me
Mhm.
earlier. Oftentimes we have an agenda. Okay, I'm going to have 2 hours of trailer loading, and it should be done
Exactly.
by 2 hours, right? I know this because my friend did it with their horse.
Mm,
Okay. They have this horse, um, and you decide, well, trailer loading is going to start 10 feet from the back of the trailer. That's where it's going to start. So I'm going to get all my gear, I'm going to get my flag, and this is where we start.
yeah.
Where has the horse had any input in the conversation, right?
Mm.
Maybe when you bring the horse out of the stall and you start walking towards the trailer,
It's
watch your horse.
already,
When they do that, what
yeah.
is your horse saying? One, you have to answer the question, am I safe? So actually, they're telling you, I'm not safe. And what are they telling you? Trailer loading starts right there,
Yes.
right where they first showed you something was wrong,
The,
not
mo
a
the
hundred
moment
yards
they look
back.
at the trailer and are a little bit more aroused, that's your moment to
And
stop.
don't think of it as the trailer loading exercise, because then you get
Exactly.
frustrated and you get mad. Think of it as working with the neurochemistry in the brain of the horse, because I guarantee you, I've seen people who work just on the neurochemistry and work with the brain of the horse, getting the horse comfortable, up
Mhm.
regulation, down regulation,
Yeah.
open the window tolerance. And I had a fellow with a Mustang, a wild horse in the United
Mhm.
States. And so he worked at regulating the nervous system. And he said, today I'm going to show all the people that watch me trailer loading. We're going to learn how to trailer load today. So he went to the back of the trailer and his horse walked onto the trailer. Wait, I didn't teach you that yet, right? If you take care of the nervous system, all the other stuff happens.
Yeah.
you think we have egos, so we think we're teaching all these things to horses.
Yeah.
I have
No,
news. They know how to walk. They know how to trot. They know how to side pass.
absolutely.
There aren't a bunch of wild horses out there saying, I can't do anything till a human comes out and finds me. So I learn how to do everything.
Yeah.
Doing is hopefully getting a partnership, getting a connection, getting an understanding, right? And then Martin Black calls those special forces horses.
Yeah.
Once you have this understanding, he can focus on a cow, he can focus on something else. He knows he has his job to do, and he knows the horse can take care of itself because they've been working with the nervous system.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. When you first asked me, why would I want to know about my horse's brain? Everything your horse does, all the chemicals, right? And if you want to learn how to work those dials, more dopamine,
Hmm.
more serotonin, less of this, more of that, you have to understand what's going on under the hood. You can train, you can make a horse do anything you want, but are you really going to have an understanding? Are you really, is that going to
Yeah.
transfer
So
everywhere?
I think this is, you touched on something there a while ago where you said like it's about as well it's about the relationship as well. You create a connection. And I mean, a lot of my work is based on that. And it's when I'm not a good horse person in my eyes. I'm not a good horse person if my horse relies on me for choices. I want a horse who thinks for themselves, even in the human world and in human conditions. And I want the horse to feel safe. That's exactly the thing. Trailer loading starts the moment. And if it's 50 meters away from the trailer, that the horse just slows down a little bit, raises the neck while you're still just walking towards. That's the first sign to stop and to say, hey, are you okay? And that's for me,
And
a
they
thing.
will recognize when you recognize that.
Absolutely. That's where I want to go
You
because
will, right there, you will start to build trust
you build
because
trust and
they know you will
exactly.
give them time.
Exactly. And you give them the feeling they are seen. And this is something which I sometimes for people, it's difficult to see in horses, but when there's an example I like to do where if you take a child, on your hand, and the child, for example, at the border of a swimming pool, and the child is afraid to jump in. The child is not afraid just of the jump. The child is already afraid to approach the border. So, like already a few meters, maybe from 15 meters away, the child will say, I don't really want to go there. You, as an adult, might say, until we can go up to 1 centimeter to the border of the water, we won't jump in, but the child is already afraid. So, if I pull the child until the point where I am fine, the child will just learn each meter we approach that I don't see that it's afraid, that the fear doesn't matter, that it's left alone, and all these things. So for me, nothing to build a relationship on. So if you think from a human lens, that's as well a point for me where you say like, oh, my horse has the exact same thing. It's just I need to learn because the child can say no and scream and pull on my hand, and I can understand it because I'm human. But I need to be able to read the signs my horse uses to express its concern. And I mean, the slightest sign is no blinking in the eye. I mean, who pays attention to that in a normal horse barn, you know? And those are things where I think yes, that's one part. And the other part is then people get afraid to do anything because they're like, oh, maybe my horse is stressed. And maybe horses are stressed as well sometimes when they learned a certain type of behavior and became their habit, because I mean, we learn by repetition. And sometimes horses show stress signs out of learned behavior because you had repetitions in the past, like for example, if you saddle them, if you put a blanket on whatever it is you're doing. Um, and that's something which I find interesting as well for me as a horse trainer often, because there is this moment to first establish this connection to say, I see your concern, I see you, I don't push you, I wait until you feel safe again and can like let go maybe of the tension or show me with other signs that you are more relaxed. But if you have these rehab horses, not only physical rehab, but behavioral rehab, I would call it, sometimes, which is
Mhm.
all like, I mean, the problems they have are human made. That's like 100%. But um, to to establish a new pattern, because I think you don't really unlearn an old one. It's just like you don't use it anymore. So you don't continue to fire and wire the same stuff. And sometimes you have this moment where the horse will, because it's so, the comfort zone is not, it doesn't mean it's only comfortable. There's as well, I'm in my thing I know, and it might be a stress I know, which I always express, which is maybe never seen, but I stay in that pattern. I don't try anything else. So to bring horses out of a pattern they are used to, sometimes you have to stress them, not like, I mean, in a
Mhm.
way which makes sense, and you have to have a plan where you want to go. I'm not saying just stressing them, but it will stress them to get out of your conditioning, even if it's bad for you, will stress you. It's the same for humans, like, I mean,
Same for him.
same for humans. Even if we know a cold shower is a good thing to do, I can force myself to do it. I really prefer the warm one, and it's not, it's so it's
What happens is when we avoid things, we shrink this window.
yes,
And then everything becomes dangerous.
yeah,
Everything, because we haven't experienced it. So the idea, brains are living tissue.
yeah,
Brains, we live wire our brains. They're designed to grow. How do they grow? By experience. So
yeah,
if you shut down that experience, then you're actually shrinking the brain. So this is called neuroplasticity. So a rehab horse may have all these very rigid patterns built in here. It's going to take patience because we have to slowly go back around and rewire. And we don't want this connection anymore. Like you say, we may never completely get rid of it, but if we don't maintain it and we pave, and you do pave these, when
hmm,
they fire, they uh, their cells called oligodendrocytes. You don't have to know that fancy word, but when those cells fire, oligodendrocytes show up and they start to wrap it with myelin. So it that the connection in the road gets paving on it. So the
yeah,
more you do this, right, the smoother it becomes, like the autobahn
yeah,
versus the country road. So
exactly.
you can wire the brain. So you always get a second chance. You can
Yeah.
always go back. You don't want to create a bad situation where you have to have a second chance, but you always can.
Mm.
Here's an important aspect is people always want to do things. I want to keep doing this. I want to keep drilling this. I need to work on this. Brains, human and horse, need time to consolidate information.
Yes.
So if you've learned something, your horse has, and you too, and you think you have it, stop
Yeah.
and let the hippocampus, an area in the brain, even with your ear,
Mm.
right? It will replay that 20 times faster than you can. And it'll replay and replay and replay, and it'll consolidate in the brain. That's what happens at night when you sleep.
Yeah.
All those things get replayed. That's why the next day you're often much better at something than you were that particular day. So if you do a little something with your horse and you think they have it, back away. Don't even pet them. This is not
Yeah.
petting, by the way.
Yeah. Amen. I'm like,
That's
and
spanking.
as well, even if you caress them for thinking like you add something positive, it's more
It's still
stimuli.
interference.
Yeah.
It's
You can
still
experience
interference
exactly. Thank
because here's the
you for
brain.
saying that.
Here's the brain. It's trying to consolidate the information you just learned.
Yes.
If you're talking to your horse, the brain is paying attention, it's distracted to
Having
you
sensual
and its
input.
information. If
Yes.
you rub your horse, good boy, good boy, good boy,
Tactile
you can do
information.
that afterwards. But what you want to see after your horse has learned something, you want to watch their head start to drop below the withers. You want to see them lick and chew, right? Start to move their lips and to stick their tongue out. All those signs that they're going back to parasympathetic and they're getting in a state so they can consolidate that information. So when you're piling on information, piling on information, piling on information, right? Your
Hmm.
horse just is overwhelmed with all that. And they don't know what's right or wrong
Yeah.
sometimes. They get it mixed up. Now they're confused. What happens when they get confused? They get scared. They
Yeah.
get sympathetically
Exhausting.
aroused. Now they explode on you this is the whole idea behind stimulus stacking. So
Mm.
here's a stressor, small stressor, but we're just going to ignore it. I don't care. My horse better get used to it. Another stressor comes along. This horse better get tough, you know, another stressor, but there's never a resetting of the
Yeah,
nervous system, down regulation. Eventually, the smallest thing, you may not even know what it is. A rabbit may jump in front of your horse. Boom, they come apart. This is when people come to me and they say, it happened out of
out of
nowhere,
nowhere.
out
Yeah,
of nowhere. But they forget 20 incidents that
yeah,
stack them above threshold where they finally came apart. The
exactly.
idea is to get to the threshold, just to the edge, and come back
Yeah,
and reset and go to
exactly.
the edge. Stay at that challenging part when you train. If you always go left on something, go right some days. You know, there's a reward prediction error. If
Hmm.
the horse thinks you're going left and you go right, ah, that's new. They pay more attention, and that's a larger dopamine hit than to go the old way again and again.
Yeah,
So if you want your horse to be curious and you want your horse to be ready to figure things out and learn to learn, you have to set the environment for them to do that.
yeah. You touched on. I want to touch on something which fits in what you just said a little bit ago because um, if we pass that stress threshold which they can stand, so we have. I just want to go back one time to the survival mechanisms, to the stress responses,
Mhm.
because flight and fight we all know, and then there is freeze, which I see very often that people confuse a type of reaction, which I would call either hypervigilance, or that, like this, there's a stimulus and then there's a little tensing up, like predict, prepare for something. And the horses get a little bit, they look a little bit like stone. And people say, oh, now he froze. And I'm like, no. So could you maybe explain that? And then
Yes.
there's in that another, because for humans, we talk of a fourth stress response, which is called fawn. And to my understanding, fawn is not applicable to horses because it requires a certain type of cognitive capacity of thinking about the past and adapting, because you can think in the past and predict the future and so on, which to my understanding, a horse brain cannot do. So maybe you could talk about
Yeah.
that from
And
your
this is good. And this is part of, we could go forever on using critical thinking, but sometimes there's a great model of human psychology that catches on and gets very popular in the press. And then people superimpose that onto the horse.
yeah.
And so they're seeing things that may not necessarily be there. Right. So freeze in terms of the autonomic nervous system is more in line with what we would call learned helplessness. This is what Martin Seligman, his experiments, if you look, he would shock a dog, for example, um, very quickly. I'll tell you what this was
Hmm.
about. He would have a dog, and it would be in a container that had a section was part A and part B. He'd show a light bulb over B, and the dog was in B. Then apply electric shock.
Yeah.
So the dog would quickly jump over to A. Light bulb would come on in A. Dog would get a shock. Dog jumps over to B. So the stress level went high for a little while, but it went down. Why? Because the dog knew how to
I
escape.
learned.
It
Yeah.
had what we call an internal locus of control. When this happens, I can reset my nervous system by
Yeah.
just jumping to the other side. Then Dr. Seligman electrified the entire grid. Dog got shocked when the light came on. It jumped to B. It started jumping frantically because that's the only behavior it knew. After a while, it realized that didn't work. It sat down in the corner and took the shock and just sat through the shock and shivered and checked out, dissociated,
Hmm.
right? Urinated on itself. These horses were traumatized. And so they would just freeze in a position and check out.
Hmm.
So what we realize and what we find is in that freeze response, you think, oh, that's sympathetic from all the stress. Maybe initially, but it's parasympathetic. It's a parasympathetic crash. Your blood pressure drops. Sometimes you faint
Mm.
when you go into a freeze response. So the blood pressure uh, will drop, and so will the person will go into a parasympathetic state. That's much different than, you know, a deer runs by and your horse startles, its ears go up, it looks out there, and
Mm.
it just sort of appears frozen. One is a true psychological trauma that comes from inescapable.
Yeah.
So the horse has to try to escape and find that it can't. So inescapable pain or
Mm.
inescapable discomfort that it can't get away from, so it finally gives up. And now, even if it does work, now, even if you went back to that light bulb experiment, the dogs won't jump,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
right? Their nervous system is now damaged,
Mm.
right?
That's exactly
So you
what,
have to, that's a rehab horse,
yeah.
but that is not, it doesn't happen in one small occurrence if it's non-traumatic. If your horse is standing still, staring off, right? That's
No, no, no.
not freeze. So we can get in trouble with our big frontal lobe. We get in trouble when we go labeling everything that we read in the psychology
Yeah.
book. So everything's
Yeah.
labeled. Oh, that must be penis envy that that horse has, right? I'm
Yeah.
just being facetious, but you know, if you've got everything labeled, we like to label things because it's explainable.
Yeah. And we like
But
boxes
the
which are
problem is,
simple.
but the thing is,
Human
it's
being.
it's inaccurate. When people tell me, you know, they talk about one neurotransmitter, dopamine. Well, if you're in the learning state, we're really talking about dopamine for reward, acetylcholine for attention, norepinephrine for arousal. It's so
You
much
have
more
a
complicated.
biochemical cocktail you need.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you can learn to be a good bartender. That's what Martin said. The best horseman he's ever known is an excellent bartender because they know where
Yeah.
the cocktail, it's not aroused enough. I need
Yeah.
more norepinephrine. It's aroused too much. I need to take off some of that cortisol,
Yeah.
right? And if we chronically create situations that stress our horses and us, right? We we'll have chronic cortisol in our system. So those horses are prone to cribbing and stereotypies. Those horses
Mhm.
are prone because they're looking for relief from the
Yeah.
stress.
Yeah.
So those horses have compromised immune systems. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of issues that happen. So if you did nothing more than every time you went out with your horse, you said, how can I create a challenging but a good experience for my horse? And when
Yeah.
they ask, am I safe? We stop long enough to see that they can downregulate. If you
Exactly.
only did those things, you would be changing the brain chemistry and the wiring of your horse.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's in one of my online courses, Stress Mastery. That's exactly the goal of that course is that that people understand that they have an influence on actually creating stress resilience, not creating it, but helping the horse to become more stress resilient. And one thing which for me, I mean, from a trainer perspective as well, like thinking of like horse training, not just behave, just not only from the behavior perspective. It is as well that certain, the sympathetic, certain muscles are sympathetically activated and so on. So you have like sometimes, depending on what you train your horse in physically for whatever discipline you want and whatever, you kind of influence without being aware of it, maybe their stress state as well by training certain muscles in their body, which keep them then backward in a brain state. And that's really interesting for me because in changing posture already, we can as well influence the state of the brain very much. And I'm working like right now. It's funny because I start to do some videos, which maybe I will do some YouTube stuff out of. I don't know yet. With a very young horse who has just been like, he was a stallion last year. Now, unfortunately, he's not anymore. And he's like two and a half. He's a very tall warm blood, very tall, very narrow chest, and so on. So like difficulties with his growing, with his balance, and he has lived with another horse of his age together, and now they start. We just do like basic communication starting. Not even I don't even want to call it groundwork because I hate that term, because it's so labeled.
Yes.
So it's just about what I teach him because his thing is really he's so stuck in his shoulders and he has a lot of go that each time he gets in a stress response, he goes in this giraffe mode. So everything which is sympathetically like aroused, he like uses those muscles and then he feels very uncomfortable. And by teaching him just that he has the choice to find a comfortable position in his body, it's very interesting now to see. And I mean, I'm just like, we're just not even like lunging or something. Not that we just have a long rope. It's about explaining him, hey, we can have signs, we can be without another horse and survive, these things. And it's very funny because he now chooses. Sometimes there are moments we there's a barn built next door, so there's like some noise and really big like cranes and stuff and so on, which are like frightening for a small young horse. And it's funny to see now that because we build it up nicely on saying, hey, I see when you are stressed, I respect where you don't want to go, and I give you the time until you can regulate and so on. He now starts this is the term which came up often, which I wanted to come back on as well. He starts to be curious because now he sees when he feels stressed, he has the time. And sometimes, they go, I mean, it's a horse. There's a sudden noise or something big moving in front of the door. Then he's like going in this thing and almost taking off. And then it's like, he has this moment of waiting and he chooses to take a body posture which is more relaxing. And then he can go and look at something. And that's so important because for me, normally horses are really curious. And when they are not curious anymore, it's because people have done something wrong most of the time.
Right.
And even for horses which were stuck in a freeze response, my way of taking care of them is the first thing I look for is I want them to be able to get so much back to their senses that they could be interested or curious about something. That's my first thing. I just want them to be curious about whatever it is. I don't care, but that they have this will to go towards something again. And this, which represents in body posture as well, thinking towards something instead of away from something. And that's why I think this how to keep your horse curious in everything you do. That it's not you do your 25 circles on the same exact
Right.
area each day at the same time, at the same speed, in the same position. But that you keep the brain alive by that.
Yeah. Dopamine, the big neurochemical related to reward, is also related to movement. And so oftentimes, if we're coming at the horse, we're making the horse do something, right? We've taken away that internal locus of control to come to something. So it's different. If I take my halter and I walk it out and I put it against my horse, it's me coming at that horse. If I take that same halter and I hold it out in front of its nose a little ways and it starts to stretch its neck to check it
Mhm.
out, then I'm facilitating curiosity.
Yeah,
And they're moving toward instead of starting to move away.
yeah,
And so you're right. If you've got a horse that's frozen and been that way, sometimes the way to get out of the freeze is just for them to engage with the world again
yeah,
requires them to have some reward for it, some sense of safety to get them out of that. And there's a reason it's called the neurosystem because it's a system. So when we start to just think of
yeah,
little pockets of things, we lose the big picture. But movement alone, movement, if I were to dance with a group, like very primitive, and they're banging drums, even with a heart rate, and the whole village is moving together,
yeah,
pretty soon our heart rates are going to be pretty similar. Our respiratory rates are going to be pretty similar. And because we feel as one, we start to bond. with
Yeah,
that group. We almost feel like a one.
absolutely.
And so this is simply movement having an effect on our neurochemistry.
Yeah,
Right. If you walk around for a few days very slowly, shuffle, look at your feet, keep your head down, drop your shoulders down, and then the next week you walk around with your chest stuck out, neurochemically you will make changes in yourself just based on your body
absolutely.
posture and in physiology. So it's a new way of thinking, but actually it's more accurate and actually it's better for your horse's welfare. And we
Yeah.
haven't gone into it, but you cannot put your head in the sand any longer when we talk about horses' welfare because of social license. And things are shutting down because the public now sees all these
Yes.
things. And what we can do, it can be a win-win. If you understand your horse's physiology and their nervous system, and you can work with that, then you oftentimes there's a rodeo cowboy, Ty Murray. He won like
Mm.
9 times world champion. He and I sat down, we were looking at films together, and he said, watch, you see, this horse is already stopping before the person pulls on the mouth. This horse is already changing gears before the person stabs him with the spurs, you know. So now the horse has something else to worry about. Oh, when am I going to get this bad feeling? Because I know it's coming.
Mm.
If we simply won our events with good stewardship, taking care of our horse, and learn to do that, then a lot of the social license stuff would go away.
Yeah.
But it gets normalized. We see the winner every time with the horse head in the air,
Yeah.
mouth gaping open. They're smiling and waving, and we
Yeah.
want to be like the winner. But the horse is losing, and your sport is going to lose also if we don't take a new way. You know, horsemanship is kind of seen like a discipline. Well, there's dressage, and there's hunter jumper,
Mhm.
and there's this, and there's horsemanship. Horsemanship isn't a separate
Yeah.
discipline. Horsemanship should be judged in every single aspect, right?
Absolutely, I agree.
To be a part of that. And we need to give judges permission to say, no, that's bad horsemanship, right?
Yeah,
So now
absolutely.
judges won't be invited back because they gave somebody a low score because they were abusive with their horse. So I think we can all win the horse, the sports, the people, if we are attuned with what naturally goes on with the horse. And so this is why I am such a proponent of understanding
Mm.
the horse. So you started this with, well, I understand my horse's brain. Well, this is where we can communicate accurately, right? Well, this isn't made up. So this is
Yeah,
not guessing. This is not guessing. This is not dominance. This is understanding the nervous system. Why? So we can work with the nervous system.
absolutely. And it will make our lives better as well, because I mean, that the human world as well, I was thinking of we need some better humanship as well, not only horsemanship.
I, I know.
Because I mean, stress is something basically I don't know anyone who doesn't have at some point in their life a problem with stress, and we have the same thing. I mean, we have the same things. We cannot focus on something anymore. We get like, or we do just repetitive behaviors and so on, and creating that's like what I really, really, I'm on fire for that topic of the relationship between humans and horses because it's not only for the horse, it's as well for the people because there's so much awareness people can like feel themselves. How many people are incapable of feeling their own bodies? How can I feel safe in this world if I don't feel my own body? For that, I need to be now. I cannot think of what I'm going to do in 2 hours or where I was yesterday or the nasty phone call I had. I need to feel me right now because it's only happening now that I can feel myself. And these things, I think our horses are awesome teachers for it because If it is via touch, like with body work or with, as well in my stress course, there are some things where you can really, because proprioception is downregulated when stress is higher. So bringing you back to feeling yourself, I do that in the course. People learn exercise to do it with their horse, but it brings us there as well. Because when I touch my horse, I need to feel it. So I need to be there. So what you just said about this rhythm and heartbeat and dancing and movement and brain, yeah, everything is connected. That's why, I mean, it's a nervous system, but it's a life system as well. So when we create touch awareness connection, we do connect with ourselves, with our horses. We come back to our basic needs. We feel like, oh, I feel a lot better if I breathe this way than another way. All these things which we all need. And I think the whole world actually needs good horsemanship because
Yes.
it's just necessary.
I would tell people if you're driving to the barn to get your horse, find a marker somewhere on the way that you're driving to the barn. And at that marker, every time ask yourself, where's my nervous system at right now?
Exactly.
What am I taking with me to
Yeah.
the barn? Because horses don't speak English, German, Dutch. They speak limbic system and they speak nervous system. That's how they know how to communicate. So you're taking, no matter what you say, is just what you say to yourself. We create narratives and stories. We make all that up in our head.
Yeah.
But what your horse is reading is the nervous system, your nervous system that you
Yeah.
take to the barn with you. And here's something interesting. Homeostasis is that area that's restorative when we talk about coming back to homeostasis. And horses, when they reset, like to come back there. I think for a lot of humans, they get hyper aroused and they stay there. They're so stressed, answering all those emails, answering all those calls. Oh, I thought I paid that bill. Oh, what's this
Mhm.
going to mean financially? Oh, I had a relationship problem. So they're hyper aroused. And when they're less hyper aroused, they think they're in homeostasis, but they're chronically stressed all the
Yeah.
time. They've never
Yeah.
even felt homeostasis,
Absolutely. And it
right?
is that
So,
there, yeah, it's there
mhm.
basically homeostasis is just chemical balance. But if your cells have adapted to create more receptors for stress hormones, whatever, like you're gonna be in a used homeostasis somewhere in stress, which is not
Yes,
which is not a healthy homeostasis. And that
no,
to get out of there, very often when people start to realize that they have a problem and so on, or like they get health problems or whatever, and they try to get to a lower stress, that feels like discomfort because you're not used to it anymore. And your
right.
body starts claiming like, hey, where are these stressy thoughts? Go back to what we're used to because that's what the balance we are used to biochemically. And that's
I don't want
that's
to
for
scare
horses as
anyone.
well. Huh?
Yeah, I don't want to scare anyone, but when you come back to homeostasis, right? True homeostasis, after learning something, neurons start to sprout, dendrites start to sprout. Then you go and you get challenged again. All these things are lit up. Now you go back to homeostasis. Oh, new dendrites are growing. It's like watering a garden and putting it in the sun, it grows. If you're stressed, do you know what happens? Neurons start to shrink.
Yeah.
You get cell death. Chronic stress creates shrinkage. Now you're shrinking your brain
Yes.
because of the stress. And you can do that with your horse. You put them under enough stress,
Yeah.
you'll shrink the brain.
Yeah.
And I've seen this on MRI. I've done hundreds of horse and human brain dissections. And you can look under the microscope, you can look on white matter changes in the brain. You put people under chronic stress over time and they lose neurons. So
Yeah.
you owe it to my mission in life is to maintain as much brain tissue in the whole world as I can.
Yes.
So when you
An
signed in
awesome
today,
mission.
you didn't know that we were helping you save your dendrites, right?
I love
Find a way. Go into try meditation. Maybe you can't do meditation. Maybe it's walks in the woods, just a hike away from things. Warm baths, find a way. And when you recognize, Practice your breathing.
Yes,
Your horse recognizes your breathing, right?
absolutely. They
Practice
recognize
your
your
breathing,
heartbeat.
but you need to find a way to self-regulate your horse, self-regulate yourself, because
Yeah,
if you can't do that with yourself, you're going to struggle doing it with your horse. They'll
absolutely.
know.
And yet, not only that they will know, it's as well a question of perception because when you're in a certain state, you perceive the world in a certain way. So when you're like have all your senses heightened, you are prepared for what's coming from the outside, where is the danger, basically. That's exactly the glasses, how you perceive the world at that moment. So you see a
Yeah.
very different world when you are in a state where you're walking in the woods, breathing deeply and saying like, I'm at peace. You will just experience a very different world.
Different brain areas light up. We know
Yes.
that yeah, you can light up the amygdala with certain things, and you can light up other areas of your brain. For example, very quickly, there's something called a PET scan, positron emission, that we can look at the metabolism of the brain. So if we have somebody who's depressed, for example,
Hmm.
there won't be a lot of metabolism in the frontal lobes. They'll be darker.
Hmm.
That's why people are depressed, have trouble thinking and making decisions.
Yeah.
So you go through psychotherapy for a while and you get out of your depression, your neurochemicals change, you put the person back in the PET scan, whew,
They're lit
their
up.
frontal lobe lit up again.
Yeah.
So your mood is going to determine how your brain functions. And I think we could go on forever and ever and ever
Forever and ever.
talking about this.
So, yeah. So I know
But
that you are, I mean, I think it's our first meeting. Maybe we will do more of those.
I
It's,
think we should.
I think we should because I think there's really very, very important knowledge. I mean, I loved how you expressed your mission. Can you repeat it again to keep alive as many dendrites in the world as possible in your lifetime? I think that's awesome. I need to think about my mission sentence, but it's really like, yeah, I really love spreading this knowledge because it just improves horses' lives and people's lives. And
Yes.
this is what we all want.
Yeah.
Um, I know that you are coming to Europe. So
Yes.
this
Can
year,
I put my slide up here?
absolutely.
Okay. You can tell me if you see this when I put it up there.
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
you share your screen.
I do horse brain clinics. They're 2.5 days. We do a horse brain dissection in which you'll hold the horse's brain. You'll see all the parts we're talking about. We really dive into understanding because I guarantee you, once you understand what the brain is doing, you're not going to see your horse the same and you're not going to train your horse the same. So there's horse uh, demonstrations with a live horse and a lot of classroom stuff, but it is not learning a bunch of scientific jargon. It's being able to translate that so it's usable and practical. You can take it back. And that's why I work with Martin Black. He takes that information back and applies it in his horsemanship. And so that's what I want to be able to give you. So I'm in Germany on the 16th and 18th of May. That's the course, 16th through the 18th. I'm in Belgium, the 23rd through the 25th. That's the course. And I'm giving an advanced course. If you took the first one and you really find that I want to know more, I'm giving a more advanced course the 30th of May and the 1st of June, a 2-day course. In that one, I'll have enough horse brains that everybody will actually do their own brain dissection under my supervision. So you really do get a good look. But if you are interested in any of those clinics, this is the contact information for Nishka Pohlman, Nieske Pohlman, Pohlmann. If you get in touch with her, this is the phone number.
She's your
And I would love
organizer.
to see you. I will save you a front row seat if you say, I watched Nancy's program. I was so intrigued. I needed to get there and learn this information. I will mark a front row seat for you so that you can come and learn this. Mhm. Nancy, it is a
Awesome.
real pleasure talking to you. I know from the time we met, we were pretty much aligned in how we saw things,
Yes.
and keep up the good work. You're doing fabulous, and if I can ever support you, I'm happy to do so. And yeah, let's do this again. Ask your listeners if you hear back from them whether they'd like to because we could have gone into a
We
billion
can
different
go
topics.
for
We
hours.
scratched the surface, is what we
Can you
did.
unshare your screen just for saying
Yes. Let
bye?
me get out of here.
I'll let you get out of here. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, Steve, it was a pleasure. I'm happy we found, I know it was difficult for us to find a time because you're very, very busy. I'm too, but I made the time for you. And you made time for me, and I'm very grateful
Yes.
for that. So I hope to see you in May. And we're in contact anyhow. And yeah,
Yes.
everyone who enjoys this, even if you cannot participate at a seminar, where do people find you?
I would go to horsebrainscience.info. All one word, horsebrainscience.info. That's my website. It's got all the events. It really tells you what my mission is, why I'm doing this, what I'm doing. And I'm now running a neuroscience blog. So you'll continue to get brand new information all the time presented on my website. So go have a look
Awesome. So,
and
Stephen,
be on the lookout. Be on the lookout for the
for the book.
science and practice of evidence-based horsemanship. Also, the original book, Evidence-Based Horsemanship, is in Dutch, it's in Polish, and we're working with a German publisher, so we may have that in German eventually here as well.
That
So
is good
thank you,
news.
everyone. The word's getting out.
That's awesome. So, thank you, Steve, for your time, and I'm looking very much forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Nancy. Have a good day.